Thank you for joining us on this special broadcast. Viewers, we are just about 5 days away from the deadline to end for Lockdown 2.0. That's 3rd of May. And the biggest talking point today in the country is what happens next. So let's try and understand, what can be expected. What about the economic help that the country is expecting from the government? Where are we headed? Joining me right now is the Principal Economic Advisor to the Finance Ministry, a known and reputed economist, Sanjeev Sanyal. Mr. Sanyal, thank you for speaking with us. It's been almost 6 weeks effectively of a lockdown. Shouldn't we now be moving towards a larger set of relaxations?
I think, as the Prime Minister made clear yesterday, this will be done taking into account the data that is available. Obviously, this is an evolving situation, so it's a matter of the unwind of the lockdown has to be done step by step using, the more localized data that we are getting from different places. So clearly, there are areas that are hotspots. There are clearly areas that are not hotspots. So a differentiated local. I think the Prime Minister hinted at, and I think we will follow through with something in those lines.
But the sense one gets is that we bought this time with the lockdown, not just to contain the infection, but also to buy us time to build health infrastructure, to prepare ourselves for a time that there may be a larger number of cases with additional beds, quarantine facilities, ventilators, what you need as far as healthcare is concerned. If that is ready, and if that's the sense that the government has, should we now be focusing more on economy? What is your view?
We have certainly made enormous amounts of effort in terms of getting the health infrastructure ready. We have a reasonable sense of where the hotspots are, what the responses can be. There's also a large global experience that we can draw on. So in that sense, we are, of course, much better prepared than when we were at the beginning of the cycle. But you're right. There is, of course, an economic price to be paid for a lockdown. And I think the Prime Minister, again, made clear that this is an issue that we take very seriously, and that there will be an effort now as we begin to look into how, in particular, we make sure that our business sector revives, that there are no payments problems, certainly make sure that the financial sector does not see a cascade of defaults from the disruptions that have happened. So you will see both the Reserve Bank, the Finance Ministry, and other parts of the government now really get into making sure that our economy opens up. Yes, taking into account the health situation as well, but that has not yet completely played out. Nevertheless, I think the economy is certainly something that we will be looking at and beginning to get it going again.
Okay, and you do know that the chorus has been growing for an economic package for, I think, 3 weeks now. Many industries and business sectors have been expecting some kind of an announcement from the government, but that's not happened so far, barring a couple of specific decisions that have been made. What's the biggest challenge that we are facing at that front?
We have taken a somewhat different approach. Many other governments around the world may have gone with the approach of announcing one big package right in the beginning. I have stated this in the media before as well. We have gone for a more calibrated approach. Now, this is not because we do not appreciate the seriousness of the challenges on the economy, or that we are not willing to do big things. It is because we think that this is not a sprint, and that we need to be willing to play this out and then slowly ramp it up. So we have been taking feedback and responding. As you will remember, the very early parts of this lockdown, the focus was making sure that the poorest people in the economy get some cash in the bank, get some physical food. So that was the initial and very first concern. Since then, the Reserve Bank has already done a series of measures in terms of lowering interest rates, trying to get liquidity out. Just yesterday, they announced a special package of liquidity for the mutual fund industry, and so on and so forth. And you will see other efforts being rolled out. This is a much more calibrated step-by-step approach. There will be a series of announcements as time, and we will ramp it up. As I said, this is not because we do not appreciate the seriousness of the issue, or whatever needs to be done will be done.
Okay, Mr. Sanyal, in a paper that you wrote and shared recently called "Risk versus Uncertainty," you write that policymakers often try to employ the same regulatory approach to tackle both risk and uncertainty, that this is a slippery slope since large range of possible outcomes in an uncertain world lead to proliferation of regulation that ironically get in the way of flexibility and transparency needed to deal with unpredictable situations. Now, we would all agree that this is a time of uncertainty with possible unpredictable situations as well. The pandemic that we are looking at, how should we read this paragraph in context to the policy in India right now?
Well, of course, we are in an uncertain situation. This is precisely the reason, this is precisely the point I was trying to make, is that policymakers very often have these grand plans ex ante because they seem to assume that they know exactly how things will pan out. Of course, you don't. I don't know any serious economist who had gone out there and predicted a pandemic in 2020. So this is a purely uncertain environment. And when you are playing in an environment where there are many moving dynamics, you do not know exactly where it will go, it is not a good idea to use up all your ammunition right in the beginning. It is far more important to do what is necessary to keep things going, but most importantly, look at what the real data says, respond to it strongly where necessary, but be willing to use it in a much more calibrated way. This is precisely what we are doing. So if you look at how we are opening up on the health front, the unwinding of the lockdown, we haven't started out right in the beginning saying, okay, we know exactly when the cycle will end. No, we look at the data, we calibratedly open it up. Same thing on the economy. We know there's been a big hit, but of course, this is still an evolving situation, not just in India, by the way, but internationally. So when we open this up, we have to make sure, of course, there's liquidity for the SMEs. We know for a fact that there are problems that the financial sector will face. There are other sectors like hospitality, airlines, and so on that have clearly been affected. But exactly how this will pan out? Well, the only way to deal with it is to look at what the data actually says, look at what the balance of risk is, and keep responding to it. This is not a sprint. There is no playbook you can follow follow blindly. You have to respond as this environment unfolds itself, and you have to consequently be willing to do it in a calibrated, systematic way.
So what is it, Mr. Sanyal, that the data is showing us right now as we speak, which is probably something that you will factor in and the government will factor in when we decide what has to happen post May 3rd?
Of course, we will look at the data now, make reasonable judgments. But remember, the world doesn't suddenly come to an end in May 3rd. There is still time after that, and we will keep looking at the data even past May 3rd, both on the health front and on the economic front. And as I keep assuring viewers, we will do what is necessary. We have lots of monetary space, and we also have fiscal space. Contrary to popular belief, our debt to GDP ratio is a lot lower than those of countries in Europe and many other parts of the world. So we also have some fiscal space. There are other areas like structural reforms which we can do. So we will do what is necessary. There is more than adequate political leadership to take the difficult decisions. So I can assure you, we take the situation seriously, and it's about doing systematic steps, calibrated, whether it's in terms of boosting demand or structural reforms. Whatever needs to be done will be done.
Okay. Is there a thought process, within the experts and advisors to the government as well, that perhaps a large part of this graded relaxation plan, the help that must be given, should also be left individually to the states? And then, further micro-targeted district-wise, you say now we have a good enough idea of what the red zones or the hot spots are, what the big problem points are. For example, cities like Mumbai or Delhi, which are also big business hubs. But outside of that, can we leave it to the states to start opening up and reviving economic activity?
Clearly, that's not for me to announce. That's for the health experts to take a view. But I think, as you may have seen, both from the Prime Minister's meetings yesterday and other experts in the field who are speaking on this issue, a graded approach will have to take into account the local conditions. So you already know that the districts have been divided up into color codes and so on. So of course that information will be taken into account. But remember one very important thing: this is an evolving situation. So it is not the case that once we have coded a bunch of districts and places in a certain set, that's permanent. We have to be vigilant and keep looking for new information and keep gathering new information. So the same is true on the economy. We obviously have a certain view of where the risks and opportunities of this economy are, right? We will take steps, but we will also at the same time have to keep our eyes open. Remember, the world into which we will rebuild our economy is not the same world from where we came. So we are not just reinflating the pre-COVID world. We will be reinflating our economy in an environment where clearly there are changes on various fronts, whether it's in terms of global supply chains or the other constraints in the system. So this is something that we will take very, very seriously, and we have to watch what we do, but be absolutely assured that the government is watching this very clearly and is willing to do what is necessary going forward.
Okay, let me ask you on a specific, because of a point that you mentioned about the steps that have been taken so far, especially some of the steps that have been announced by the RBI. But there is a lot of feedback that's still coming, from on ground, from the industry, that while banks have been asked to help the industry more with liquidity, with cash availability, and lend more, steps that have been taken by the RBI to that effect. But on ground, it's not happening. There is still some amount of apprehension and hesitation within the banks, because they fear for what will happen next if you give out more money and then those businesses also shut down, say a few months later.
Some reluctance in some quarters on risk taking, but this is something that the central bank and the Ministry of Finance are aware of, and again, various
Okay, we seem to have lost that line with Mr. Sanyal. I'm going to try and get him back as soon as possible. We've lost that connection with the principal economic advisor. But one key headline that comes out from what he said is that the government will come out with a set of announcements in a graded manner for the economic sector itself and the industry, and it will be ramped up. I believe Mr. Sanyal is back with us now. We lost the audio line with you, Mr. Sanyal. Go ahead, please. You were answering my question. Okay, we're just going to get him back and patch that again. So, yes, the industry can expect a series of announcements in the coming weeks, and that it will be ramped up by the government, the principal economic advisor to the finance ministry, making it very clear that they are aware of the difficulties on ground. In fact, he was just responding to my question about the resistance and hesitation that's there even from the banks, despite the announcements that have been made by the Reserve Bank. So we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with more questions for Sanjeev Sanyal.